Hi, this is Chuck Sachs from Indie Opera Podcast with my second installment of Interviews from the Void. These are interviews that never got released last year. This one is with Ryan Brown of Opera Lafayette, and we're talking about the creation of The Blacksmith, an adaptation of the opera by Philidor. So you have great luck because on June 20th, as part of Fete De La Musique, you can see the making of The Blacksmith at 11 a.m., and then at 12 p.m., the full performance of Philidor's The Blacksmith. Opera Lafayette introduces Fete De La Musique. It's 12 hours of free original classical performances online Sunday, June 20th, 2021, from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. They will feature music from Bach, Forqueray, Rehearsal, Philidor, behind-the-scenes views into the creation of a production, family-friendly musical programming, and full concert productions, concert highlights, and many more. And you can find this and sign up for it at www.operalafayette.org/calendar/FDLM21. Please look for the link in the notes for the interview also. So, enjoy my interview with Ryan Brown and find out about the creation of The Blacksmith.
Puts a man in fine fettle, it gives him guts and mettle. It's a clang-a-dang, 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 clang-a-bat-to-ba-da-to-ba-to, to. J'encourage dans l'ouvrage, car le bien ne vient point tôt. Dor, mo-pa-da-to. Here out west, life is rough, a man's gotta be tough. Life is lots of hard work, there ain't no time to shirk, there ain't no time to shirk. Pa-da-to, with a clang-a-dang clang, a man earns his own keep, he don't earn any sleep. In the west, if you snooze, then you lose.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Hi, Chuck. I'm just fine. I'm in considering,
Yes.
We're already on Plan Z, Z62, but we are actually moving forward with some plans for performances, which is exciting, of course. And
That is indeed
hard to do.
And how are you and your family and the Opera Lafayette family doing during COVID-19?
Well, ironically, we've had more staff meetings than we've ever had before because we do it on Zoom now. And if you're in the same room, there's no excuse to. There's always an excuse to say, "Oh, we'll do it later." But this way, we actually get each other. And so, in fact, that's been a small silver lining for us. That there's been a lot of nice communication within the group. And the board and the staff, and even as we find it so hard to figure out how to move forward in these tumultuous times.
I know it's New York Opera Alliance is meeting every Wednesday and alternating whether it's the executive committee or it's all the companies, but we're talking more than we have when we used to produce these things live, and it's costing a lot less for our budget. So yay!
Right.
So what modifications have you put in place to continue producing?
Well, we were scheduled to do a rural residency with this piece here in southwestern Colorado in April and May, and then to follow with performances in the East, both in Washington and New York. And now, while we still are a little unsure about our Washington and New York dates. We have dates, but of course, we're waiting to hear from Holt what their policies will be. We are moving forward with performances here in Southwest Colorado, the residency and performances, because we're able to do them, the performances at least, outside. And so we have, which was not originally in the plan at all. And and that's been kind of both exciting and daunting to work out. We are in the Southwest, and of course not far away. Cases are surging in Arizona, and but Colorado has done a rather good job of keeping things contained, and this particular area is relatively unpopulated. So, which is part of the point of the project too, with rural meets urban, and that's enabled us to set up a performance space in front of an old barn and blacksmith shop, which are the perfect background for this particular opera.
Now, I mean, is this the first opera you've done by Philidor? And then why choose this one? Whereas all the other ideas happening behind there to westernize it? Well,
yeah, ironically, this is actually our third opera by Philidor, believe it or not. He wrote one called Sancho Panza, which was the first we did, a real opera buffa. And then he wrote something called Les Femmes Vengées, and we coupled that with Così of Mozart, a French Così, and as we did it as the third act, as it were, of Così, and took that production to Versailles years ago. So Philidor is actually a kind of seminal composer of the mid to late part of the 18th century, who we've championed for quite some time.
So before we get too deep into everything, why don't you just give my audience, I know, and a lot of them will, but some of them won't, what is the work that Opera Lafayette does?
You mean generally?
What is your focus?
Well, our focus has always been the 18th century, and we've looked at predecessors of composers and in the 18th century that we've gone back to the 17th century, and of course even some smaller concerts, Monteverdi. And then we've looked forward to developments in the early 19th century, which came out of the 18th century. So Opera Lafayette is kind of focused on the 18th century repertoire, but also we go back and do 17th century repertoire, which sort of prefigures that 18th century repertoire. We've done Lully and even some Monteverdi, although not his operas, in the 17th century. And we've looked into the 19th century, into music that clearly came out of 18th century forms, like Beethoven's Leonore most recently, and even as late as 1862, Félicien David's La Larouque, an opera comique of. But our main focus is the 18th century, and there have been at least two areas of opera which one doesn't get a chance to hear very often that we've championed in particular. One of them is opera ballet, and so we've done a lot of French opera with dance. And then the other is opéra comique, which you mentioned, and which the Blacksmith is a great example of.
And what is the French title of it, the opera?
Le Marechal ferrant.
Thank you.
The blacksmith or farrier, the guy who shoes your horses. But this particular blacksmith is also a veterinarian, which my grandfather happened to be out here, and he also doctors people, and because there's no doctor when there's no doctor around, and that gets to the crux of the plot, which is of this comedy. Right.
So now your goal, you've American Westernized, as I'm saying, and what is the goal there? Besides, of course, bringing it to a larger audience that wouldn't necessarily go to opera comique.
Well, there's several goals. One, as a purely artistic one, is to opera comique was hugely popular in the vernacular in lots of different countries. So these French opera comiques were taken to Germany, to Russia, to Sweden, to America, and they were translated into their own languages. We've never translated an opera comique completely into English. And so we think the immediacy of we'll get to the immediacy of the comedy by doing that. So that's that's the artistic part of the experiment. There's also a kind of social experiment going on here in that the themes are rural ones, and they're ones which we think would resonate with rural people in America as well. And so it's a way to find out whether in fact that's true, whether this kind of piece that even though it was on rural themes in 1761, it was so popular that the royal theaters wanted to take over the opéra comique. And in fact, this piece was the last of the ones that was before, while the opera comique was still independent and not sponsored by the royal theaters. But so it's obviously been something that's attracted urban people since the 18th century, but it also has these themes which I think resonate to rural life, at least as people here might remember it from say the 1890s. And in fact, the director Nick Olcott, who's from Montana, and originally he lives in Washington now, and our family, we joke that we have we're channeling our grandmother's voices and writings in this piece by updating it to 1890s West.
I mean, the way I look at it is, I mean, opera comique really then brought us to operetta, and as we know, operetta brought us to musicals.
Right.
Exactly. Opera comique had both singing different types of songs, and in arietta, because it was with Philidor, it moved to more in Italian, but then it would mix in the French folk songs. So it was this dichotomy, and then there was also dialogue. Right,
exactly. And that's, most people, of course, know that American musicals came out of the Viennese operetta, but not a lot of people know that the Viennese operetta then kind of came out of the French 18th century opera comique. And as you just mentioned, there are folk songs involved here, and this opera comique was one of the last French opera comiques to employ folk songs in addition to the complicated ensemble work that Philidor wrote. And he was good at that because he was raised in the chapel at Versailles, and he knew how to write contrapuntal music. So.
Yes, I mean, reading his history, his whole family seemed to have been court musicians. As a matter of fact, I mean, they got the last name of Philidor from Louis. Which Louis? The 14th or the?
Yeah, it goes back. His family were a lot of, especially wind players, I think.
Yes. Louis the 13th. Yes, they were all wind players, oboe players, right? And really, the family name originally was Duncan, which became Danican, and it was Scottish. So, but French and Scots have been so mixed for so long.
And the people, you know, it reminds me that people know, of course, those folk songs of Robert Burns so well. But in fact, the French, these easy to sing, easy to remember folk songs were part of the French, kind of any person's vocabulary. And so this gave us an opportunity to then take American folk songs, and I plucked most of ours out of the Alan and John Lomax's book of American folk song, and we placed them where the French folk songs would have been, and we've adjusted the texts only in a little way to fit our plot.
Yes, you sent me the video, which is like your preview video telling the plot, and it was really fascinating to hear. It's like, oh, I recognize that melody and everything. But one of the other things about opera comique, because it came from the fairground, is a closing vaudeville, and Philidor was kind of moving out of it. But do you still use that? Because what that sounds like to me is so that the whole audience would start. It would be a call and response between the cast and the audience. It sounds like what we have now in certain musicals, these mega mixes at the end, where suddenly you relive all the music from the musical condensed down to like 10, 15 minutes. Is that kind of like what the vaudeville was?
Well, it's in a sense, it gets every character out there on stage, but it doesn't necessarily. It usually picks its own tune, and so it doesn't pull out all the tunes from previous. But in fact, in this particular, in the Blacksmith, it does pull from the very first opening aria of the piece and gives it a kind of formal, button. And that particular aria has this blacksmith's sound of him working at his forge, and so there's a lot of that, tone painting in French music. And another interesting highlight about this actually is that the story was originally from Boccaccio's Decameron, and the crux of the story comes from another time of play.
and Italy.
Yeah, right, exactly. As you mentioned, Philidor was Italian, and he was accused by some in France of being too Italian. But the fact is, it was so damn popular, everybody just kind of eventually fell for it.
And it's interesting because when they were incorporated into the French royal companies, they put them into Commedia Italienne.
The opéra comique was essentially the Comédie Italienne became the opera comique. It was earlier they were merged in such a way that a lot of those the companies were literally the Italians and the French were had to suddenly work together. And a lot of the familiar commedia dell'arte situations you'll still find in some of these.
I was wondering about that. It seemed like that might be where it's leaning towards the character archetypes.
Well, this the story that comes from Boccaccio is that the wife of a doctor entertains her lover while the doctor's away, and the lover accidentally takes one of the potions, thinking it's something good to drink, and he's knocked out cold, and she has to get the body out of the house before her husband comes home. And of course, the French were, because they sort of dressed it up in slightly more respectably by having it be the blacksmith's daughter who is entertaining her boyfriend, and when this happens. But it also then, when he comes to, everybody thinks he's a ghost, and so there's this kind of that angle to the story as well, before it all gets patched up, as it were. So,
you've been in rehearsals out there. Is the cast with you, or they're all scattered everywhere? How are people getting together to do this, and what is the logistic of the performance? Because with singing, we know you have to be like 18 feet away from people.
Right. And in fact, we've got a questionnaire out to all the cast who is not yet here. And all right, how are we going to quarantine as a group? Once we establish everybody's healthy, then we're not going to restage things. We're going to stage them. That is, there will be contact, and so we have to make sure that everybody is comfortable doing that. And of course, establishing that they're healthy before they do, and then everyone agree that they'll have very limited social contact with others while we're in the rehearsal process.
Because you can't really sing with masks. Just talking with masks. Forget eating with masks. It just starts crawling down your face. It's like, I can't imagine singing opera with a mask.
It would be a little muffled.
Yeah. It's definitely.
So and here, of course, we've never worked. We have a period instrument orchestra, musicians, generally speaking, and
Right.
so we don't work with sound enhancement, but we're going to use that for the first time outside. And we do have to have the guidelines here in Colorado are that you right now are that the performers have to be 25 feet away from the audience, and that the audience has to be spaced out, of course, and that you can only have about 175 in an outdoor venue. So we're going to bring in hay bales and place them around so everybody knows where they have to sit, and so we're excited. It's a collaboration. This was going to be in what's called the Mancos Opera House, which is one of these early 20th century places of entertainment that was built above a mercantile store. And there's a wonderful couple out here who's bought it and is renovating it for the use of the public in the future. And so we'll actually be rehearsing there and kind of have the theater to ourselves and give just a handful of people who will come in to hear a scene. And since the indoor requirements are even more restrictive, of course, and then have everybody come to come hear it outside. And it's a joint benefit between we're doing 3 performances, and the first 2 are a benefit for the local creative district, and the third is going to be a benefit for the local cattlemen's association. So the idea is as not only rural and urban, but out here you've also got these very different populations of people who work in agriculture and people who are more retired and interested in the arts, and the idea is to provide something which everyone realizes. Oh, we're human and responding to similar situations, and can listen to something together and hopefully talk together as well. So.
Now, are you going to make a stream available? Are you going to live stream or a recording after the fact available of that production?
We are going to be filming both the performances out here, as well as we're trying to figure out how to make kind of documentary about how we're doing this, not only in the age of COVID, but in a small community which does not, needless to say, have an opera company here regularly.
Yes, I did read it's a small town, about 1,000 people, but
Right.
it's had an influx of artisans. It sounds exciting what's happening there, and that the rebirth of this opera house could possibly bring more attention and interest.
I think so. It's really they're wonderful. I mean, Opera Lafayette plays in small theaters anyway, and this is a really a wonderful little one. I remember playing in the Telluride Opera House, which was, from those was a little fancier because it was done with that was a silver, huge silver mining going on in the 1890s, and that had beautiful acoustics, and this one has very nice acoustics as well. So when you think of those days when Lily Langtry or Oscar Wilde were going across the West, and there were regular entertainments being brought when we didn't have television and internet. I think there's an excitement in providing that kind of kind of touring, and so we're excited. Yeah, and we did the rehearsal. You asked about the rehearsing. Although we haven't rehearsed with the cast except online a little bit. The guitarist who we're taking this orchestral work and making it for a Western band, violin, guitar, and bass. And the guitarist is actually one of the national fingerpicking champions, and he was over in eastern Colorado, and he came over here, and so we rehearsed outside, we did a little presentation for some people outside not long ago, and so we're getting our part ready, and singers are getting theirs, and we're hoping to get together and put it all together here in late September.
Wow. Well, you're figuring it out, and that's not easy. But and what are the hopes for the rest of the season once you come back to actually producing in New York and DC?
Well, we're looking at a festival in New York in June, and in late June. Obviously we've been looking at possible performances in DC in January and March, but the Kennedy Center hasn't told us what their policies will be definitively, except we know, like the Met, and they're canceled mostly through December 31st.
Yeah.
And so everyone's touch and go for January or March. And we're looking at possible other online projects during that time, but very much hoping that we'll be in front of a live audience again in a festival, a 3-day festival in the end of June in New York.
Well, good luck, and I hope to be there watching it or hearing it.
We hope you are too.
And definitely, if please send me the links so I can share it with our audience about live streams or other things. I know I'm going to share the video, your preview video.
Terrific.
And great. Well, have a lovely time out there and make some great music.
Well, and we'll hope New York keeps making things easier for life on the street, and as well as in the theater eventually.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, this has been Chuck Sachs with Ryan Brown for Indie Opera Podcast. Stay well and safe, everyone.